Welcome to Alone. Here, we uncover chilling stories and unsettling events that blur the line between truth and nightmare. Every tale you hear is inspired by real encounters, whispered secrets, and shadows that refuse to fade. If you believe in the unknown, you're in the right place. Subscribe now and join us, because tonight's story might be true. It was a stupid decision, of course. All terrifying stories start with a stupid decision. Mine was to take the scenic route home, a shortcut through the back roads of rural Tennessee I'd been told about by a friend who swore it was faster. It was. It was late September, the kind of night where the air bites with a crisp, premature cold and a thick, inky darkness swallows the world as soon as the sun dips below the horizon. The kind of darkness you can feel, a heavy, suffocating blanket. My phone died just as I was losing the last bars of signal. I remember the exact moment. The screen went black, and the silence in the car became a presence. No GPS, no music, no podcasts. Just the hum of the engine and the rhythmic slap of the wipers on the windshield as a fine, persistent mist began to fall. I'd been driving for what felt like hours, passing nothing but fields and the skeletal frames of bare trees. The road was a narrow, winding ribbon of asphalt, unmarked and unlit. The mist grew thicker, turning the headlights into useless cones of diffused light. It felt like I was driving through a ghost story, not a state. I saw the cabin just as I was about to give up and sleep in the car. It was set back from the road, a dark, shadowy shape in a small clearing. No lights on, but the sight of a structure, any structure, felt like a lifeline. I pulled off the road onto a muddy, rutted track that led to the front door. The engine died with a cough as I turned the key, and the sudden silence was startling. The only sound was the drip of water from the trees and the faint, rhythmic creak of something in the distance. I got out, the cold immediately seeping through my jeans and jacket. The air was heavy with the smell of wet earth, and something else, something a little sweet, a little sickly, like rotting leaves and old flowers. The cabin was old, its dark wood walls weathered and warped. The porch had a sagging roof and a single, unadorned rocking chair that creaked back and forth with a slow, deliberate rhythm in a breeze I couldn't feel. The sound was the source of the creaking I'd heard from the car. I walked up the 3 broken steps, the boards groaning under my weight. I knocked on the door. Nothing. I knocked again, louder this time, my knuckles stinging. Still nothing. The creaking from the chair was the only response. I tried the doorknob. It turned easily. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to get back in my car and lock the doors, but the cold was biting, and the thought of sleeping in a dead vehicle on a deserted road was becoming unbearable. I pushed the door open, a long, drawn-out squeal of protest from the hinges echoing into the blackness. Inside, the cabin was even colder. The air was stale, thick with the scent of dust and damp wood. A fireplace stood in the corner, empty and cold. I reached for my phone, forgetting it was dead, and cursed it under my breath. The lack of light was suffocating. I felt my way along the wall, my hand brushing against something that felt like a rough fabric. I found a table, and on it, what felt like a lantern. I fumbled with it, my fingers numb, and finally found the striker. A small, stuttering flame flickered to life, casting long, dancing shadows across the room. The cabin was one large room. In the center was a bed, crudely made with a thin, stained mattress. On the floor in front of the fireplace, a rug was rolled up, and on it, a child's toy, a small wooden horse, lay on its side. The rest of the room was empty, save for a few shelves holding nothing but dust. The strange part was the floor. It was a single, smooth sheet of wood, but in the center, directly in front of the bed, was a square of a different material. It was darker, almost black, and the texture was wrong. It looked like dried mud or something even thicker. I knelt down and touched it, the surface rough and almost sticky. A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I stood up, the lantern light shaking in my hand. I felt like I was being watched. I spun around, my eyes darting from shadow to shadow. Nothing, just the cabin walls and the empty chair on the porch still creaking. I told myself it was just nerves. The cold and the silence were getting to me. I decided to try to light the fireplace just to get some warmth. I found a pile of old newspapers and some kindling under a bench. The fireplace was filthy, the soot caked on the bricks like a dark moss. I noticed a large pile of ash, much more than a single fire would produce. It was almost overflowing. I fumbled with the matches, my hands trembling. The first one failed to light, the second one sparked and went out, and the third one finally caught, a tiny, struggling beacon. I held it to the newspaper and it crackled to life. A thin wisp of smoke curled up the chimney, but with it came a strange, sweet smell. Not the smell of burning paper or wood, but that same sickly sweet smell I'd noticed outside. The smell grew stronger, and as I fanned the flames, a low, guttural humming sound started. It wasn't coming from the fireplace. It was coming from the floor, from that strange, dark square. I froze, the match burning my fingertips. The humming grew louder, a low, resonant vibration that seemed to come from deep in the earth. The floorboards around the square began to shake, a rattling, rhythmic sound. The humming shifted, taking on a new quality, less like a hum, more like a long, drawn-out groan. It sounded alive. I backed away, my heart pounding in my throat, the lantern swinging wildly in my hand. The humming stopped as abruptly as it began, replaced by a sound that made my blood run cold. A scraping, a slow, deliberate dragging noise from under the floor. It was like something was being dragged across a rough surface. The sound moved in a circle, a slow, methodical circuit around the square. I could hear it now, a distinct scraping sound followed by a soft thud, a pause, and then the scraping again. Scrape, thud, scrape, thud. I turned and scrambled for the door. The rocking chair on the porch was still creaking, but now it sounded different. More insistent, faster. I burst through the door and stumbled down the broken steps, my feet sinking into the mud. I didn't look back. I just ran. I fumbled with the car door, my hands so numb I couldn't feel the handle. I finally got it open and fell inside, slamming the door shut and locking it. I sat there, gasping for breath, the silence in the car now a welcome relief. The rain was coming down harder now, a steady downpour drumming on the roof. I looked up at the cabin through the rain-streaked windshield. The rocking chair had stopped. The only thing I could see in the dark was the faint glow from the lantern I had left behind. Then I saw it. In the broken window on the second floor, a pale shape was pressed against the glass. It was tall and thin, but I couldn't make out any features. The figure turned its head slowly, a long black streak of hair visible against the pale face, and it looked directly at me, and I saw it smile. It was a long, thin slash of black in the center of its face. The smile was impossibly wide, stretching from one side of its head to the other, a jagged, unnatural line that seemed to tear its skin. My breath hitched. I fumbled with the keys in the ignition, my fingers shaking so hard I couldn't get the key in the slot. I dropped them and they fell into the dark space under my seat. My heart was a drum in my chest, a frantic, desperate rhythm. I could hear a new sound over the rain now, a soft scratching noise coming from outside the car. I looked out the side window and saw it, a hand, pale and thin, with long, blackened fingers scratching at the glass. I screamed, a strangled sound that was swallowed by the darkness. I didn't know what to do. I was trapped. The thing was outside and my keys were gone. I looked at the cabin one last time. The figure in the window was still there, its smile still stretched across its face. And beside it, in another window, I saw a new figure, and another, and another, all of them pale, all of them impossibly thin, all of them with that same horrible, stretched smile. They were all looking at me, watching, and they were all scratching at the windows, their long, black fingers scraping at the glass. I never did find my keys. The rain stopped, the scraping stopped, and the smiles in the windows faded into the darkness. But every night when the wind howls, I still hear that scraping sound just outside my window, and I know they're still waiting. You know, there are some memories that they don't fade, they don't soften with time. They just sit there in a dark corner of your mind, and every now and then they slide out and tap you on the shoulder. This one, it's one of those. It happened years ago, but telling it now, I can feel the cold all over again. It was late autumn, about 3 years back. I was driving home from a mate's place in Devon. The plan was simple: hit the motorway and be back in London by midnight. But I'd stayed longer than I meant to, and by the time I was on the road, it was already well past 11. I was tired, the kind of tired that makes your vision blur at the edges, and I made the monumentally stupid decision to avoid the motorway traffic and take the A roads. A shortcut, I thought, a scenic route. The further I got, the narrower the roads became. Just a single lane, lined on both sides by hedges that seemed to claw at the car in the darkness. The moon was a sickly sliver of white, doing nothing to cut through the gloom. Then the fog rolled in. Not a gentle mist, but a thick, soupy wall of it that descended without warning. It was the kind of fog that swallows sound, makes the world feel smaller and quieter, and turns your own headlights into useless, fuzzy orbs. I couldn't see more than 10 feet in front of me. The digital map on my phone was a useless blue line in a sea of gray, and before I knew it, the signal dropped entirely. My phone died with a soft ping, and suddenly I was truly alone. The hum of the engine, the rhythmic swipe of the wipers, they were the only things tethering me to reality. For what felt like an eternity, I drove on, slowly, hoping to stumble upon a signpost, a village, anything. Then I saw it, the silhouette of a church spire just barely visible above the fog. Hope, or at least a brief moment of it. I followed the sign that pointed towards St. Jude's Parish, which led me down an even smaller track. The road became pitted and uneven, and I had to slow to a crawl. The air thickened, smelling of damp earth and something else. Something ancient, like stone and decay. The lane ended at a set of rusted iron gates. Beyond them, a small, overgrown graveyard sloped up towards the dark shape of a tiny, ancient stone church. The fog was even thicker here, curling around the mossy gravestones like spectral fingers. A cold, damp wind swept down the hill, carrying with it a faint, whispering sound. It wasn't a human voice, just a low, sibilant rustle, like dry leaves skittering across the ground. I told myself it was just the wind, nothing more. But it was a sound that made the hairs on my arms stand up. My car's engine began to sputter. Not a dramatic failure, just a quiet, choked gasp, and then it went silent. The headlights blinked out. The world went black, save for the weak glow of the dashboard lights. The silence that followed was immense, heavy, and profound. The only sound was the far-off rustle of the wind. And then I heard footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, and crunching on something, gravel maybe, coming from within the graveyard. I sat perfectly still, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My heart hammered a desperate rhythm against my ribs. I tried to convince myself it was an animal, a fox or a badger, but the steps had a rhythm, a weight to them that was undeniably human. The steps stopped. A long, agonizing silence passed. I held my breath, straining my ears, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. I could see nothing but the thick, gray wall of fog. My mind, in a desperate attempt to rationalize, told me I'd imagined it. It was the fatigue, the cold, the unsettling silence. And then I felt it, a slow, chilling drop in temperature inside the car, a cold that didn't feel natural. It wasn't just the outside chill seeping in. It felt like something had just entered the space around me. A feeling of pure, unadulterated dread settled over me, a physical weight on my chest. I felt like I was being watched from inches away. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. A whisper, soft and dry as old paper, tickled my ear. I can't tell you what it said. It wasn't a language I knew. It was just a sound, a puff of cold air, a syllable of malice. I let out a choked cry, a sound that was instantly swallowed by the dense fog. I lunged for the keys, fumbling, my fingers shaking uncontrollably. I jammed them into the ignition, my frantic movements a desperate blur. Nothing. The engine just clicked. Panic took over. I slammed the door open and stumbled out into the cold. I don't know why I did it, some primitive fight or flight instinct, I suppose. I ran blindly, not caring where I was going, just needing to get away. My feet splashed through puddles and slid in the mud as I sprinted down the lane. I kept looking back, half expecting to see a figure chasing me, but there was only the fog swirling and churning behind me. But I could still feel it, that cold presence, clinging to my back like a shroud. I could feel it breathing on my neck. Just as my lungs were burning and I thought I would collapse, I saw the headlights of a car coming down the main road. I stumbled out of the lane, waving my arms frantically. The car swerved, its horn blaring, and the driver, a kind-faced woman with a worried expression, stopped and asked if I was all right. I could barely speak. I just pointed back towards the lane, my voice a ragged gasp. She looked, her brow furrowed in confusion. "There's no road back there, love," she said, her voice laced with concern. "Just an old farmer's track that ends in a field." I looked back. The lane was gone, replaced by a dense, impenetrable hedge. The old graveyard, the church, it had all vanished. She drove me to the nearest town and I told her a story about getting lost. I didn't tell her the truth. I couldn't. When I got home the next day and checked my car, there was nothing. No footprints, no strange marks, nothing to prove what had happened. I tried to tell myself it was a hallucination, a product of sleep deprivation and fear. But I still have a memory of that whisper. And every time a cold draft touches my ear, I remember that it wasn't from the outside. It was a cold that came from within. The thing about a small town at 2 in the morning is the quiet. It's not just an absence of noise. It's a presence, a heavy, suffocating blanket of silence that makes you feel like the last person on earth. I know because I used to walk home from my late shift at the diner every night, and that was the quiet I learned to dread. My town, Crestwood, is one of those places that feels frozen in time. Old brick buildings, streetlights that flicker and hum, and sidewalks that buckle and crack from decades of tree roots growing beneath them. This particular night, the air was still and damp, carrying the faint, sweet scent of newly mown grass and the metallic tang of an approaching storm. I had my headphones in, but the music was just a low thrum against the vast silence. It felt like a sacrilege, a defiance of the oppressive peace. I was about halfway home when I first felt it. A prickle on the back of my neck, that ancient primal alarm bell that tells you you're not alone. I'm a rational god. I told myself it was just a car, a late-night delivery truck. But when I glanced over my shoulder, the street was a long, empty tunnel of amber light. Nothing. I sped up my pace. The crunch of my sneakers on the pavement seemed incredibly loud. The shadows cast by the flickering streetlights stretched and contorted, turning mailboxes into crouching figures and overgrown bushes into grotesque shapes. I kept my eyes forward, but the feeling intensified. It wasn't just a prickle anymore. It was a cold, tangible weight between my shoulder blades, the definite sensation of being followed. I could almost hear the footfalls behind me, a soft, uneven scuffing sound like someone dragging their feet. I turned the corner onto Elm Street, the long, winding road that led to my house. The streetlights here were older, more spaced out, and the shadows were deeper. On my left was the old cemetery. St. Joseph's it was called. It's been there since the town was founded, and the tombstones are so old their inscriptions are worn smooth. The iron fence around it was bent and rusted in places, and the tall, skeletal trees inside the ground seemed to reach for the sky like twisted, bony fingers. I always hated walking past it. As I passed the cemetery gates, the scuffing sound behind me seemed to stop. I took a quick, nervous glance back. Nothing. Just the empty street, the flickering streetlight, and my own shadow. I breathed a shaky sigh of relief, but it was short-lived. A new sound started. Not footsteps, but a low, grating whisper. It sounded like it was coming from inside the cemetery, a rustling in the dry leaves and grass, a voice made of nothing but static and wind. It was too low to make out any words, but the tone was all wrong. It was a sound of malevolence, of ancient, unblinking hatred. My blood ran cold. I started to jog, my heart pounding in my ears. The whisper followed me, a continuous sibilant hiss that seemed to snake out from behind every tombstone. I felt like I was running through a hall of open mouths. I didn't dare look back again. My mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation. The wind, the creak of a tree. No, this was deliberate. This was targeting me. I finally cleared the cemetery and reached the edge of town, where the houses became more frequent. The streetlights were brighter here, and the presence of normal life, even sleeping life, felt like a shield. I glanced back one last time at the last streetlight before the residential block began, and that's when I saw it. Not a person, not really. It was a silhouette, impossibly thin and tall, standing on the other side of the road. It wasn't looking at me. Its head was bowed as if it was studying something on the ground. Its arms were unnaturally long, its fingers trailing on the pavement. I couldn't see any features, just a dark, wavering outline. The light from the street lamp was behind it, so it should have been well lit, but the light seemed to bend around it, as if it were a hole in the world. As I watched, mesmerized by terror, it slowly, so slowly lifted its head. It was looking at me. I could feel its gaze like a physical touch. But there were no eyes, just a smooth, featureless surface where a face should be. My legs froze. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't obey. The thing took a step, a long, gliding motion that made no sound. It was moving across the street, coming towards me. I finally broke free, a guttural scream catching in my throat. I sprinted the last 3 blocks to my house, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so violently I couldn't get the key in the lock. The scraping sound from the cemetery was back, but now it was closer, just behind me. I fumbled and cursed, and finally, mercifully, the door opened. I stumbled inside, slammed the door shut, and slid the bolt home, my back pressed against the wood, gasping for air. I stayed like that for a long time, listening to the silence. Nothing. The street outside was quiet again. I told myself it was exhaustion, my mind playing tricks on me. A hallucination. But when I finally had the courage to look out the peephole, I saw it, standing on the sidewalk right in front of my house. Just a tall, thin silhouette. I couldn't see the face, but I knew it was staring at my door. I've never told anyone this story. People would think I was crazy, but I'm not. I still work late. I still take the long way home. And every single night when I get to my front door, I still feel that cold weight on my back, and I know exactly who it is. And every morning when I step outside, I find a tiny black feather on my doorstep. I don't know where it comes from. I don't know what it means. but I pick it up and I throw it away. I've been doing it for 3 years now. I've filled up a shoebox with them. I just found one on my pillow this morning. Thank you for joining us tonight on Alone. If this story gave you chills, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more terrifying tales. Share this with someone brave enough to listen in the dark. Remember, fear is always closer than you think. Stay tuned, and we'll meet again with another story that might just be true. Subscribe now if you dare.